Welcome, everyone, to episode 3 of Fill the Glass. I'm Kerry Millsap. The topic today is going to be audience choice. We will have a special guest next week, Nancy Spafford, who you can see there, she's in cell 3 of my video montage, is going to talk to us a little bit of. I'm going to ask her some questions about some stuff that went on at Lawrence Livermore National Labs. So that's going to be exciting. So that'll happen next week, God willing. As we know, not all of our plans always work out just perfectly. But today, what I'd like to do, we've got some really sharp folks on the meeting live here. We had a really good conversation before. We were talking a little bit about both autonomous data warehouse and autonomous transaction processing brands, I guess you could say, or editions of Oracle. And Dallas, you'd asked the question about, is it really true that with ADB, all we get is a level 1 trace? And the answer that I gave you was, at least as of 19.18.0.1.0, that is in fact the case. We only just get level 1, which is no waits, no binds, and plan stat equals first execution. So Dallas, I'll put you on the spot really quickly. Did we cover everything that you wanted to know about that topic before the call started?
Yes.
Awesome. Anybody else have anything to say or ask about autonomous data warehouse or autonomous transaction processing and tracing? I'll actually, Nancy knows, because as one of my later technical reviews of this guy, we've gyrated through this sequence of, well, is it even ethical to sell a book like this to somebody that has autonomous data warehouse? Because this book is about things like statistics level and max dump file size, and all these things that autonomous doesn't give you access to. So the book covers autonomous, but unfortunately, it only takes about 4 pages of the 60-something page book to do that. So we kind of battled through a set of options about, well, do I say that on the back cover? I don't want people to buy the book and be disappointed about having a book that, if their whole world is autonomous, then the book just says, sorry, there's not much you can do. Here's everything you can do. And it's 4 pages because some of it's kind of interesting, the ability to go get your data from the object store, for example. Anyway, I went ahead and decided that there's basically a fork in the road. In chapter 1, it's called your first trace. It's literally hello world, and then it says your first trace. And then very early in the first paragraph, it says, if you're the commander of your own XE or SE or EE or Exadata instance, then you can run these commands and get your very first trace file. And it's not a whole lot of typing. But then it says on the very first page, but if you're on Oracle Autonomous, one of the autonomous editions, then you need to skip to page 53 and follow those instructions there, because it's a totally different way to turn on tracing. It's a totally different way to get the trace file at the end. So that's how I handled it. And I'm hopeful that people that are autonomous folks won't be too offended by that. And then, of course, if Oracle releases the feature, which I believe they will, which will allow binds and waits, then I expect I'm probably going to have another edition of the book that I'll have to produce. So I know that's a lot more, Dallas, than you had asked, but that's kind of the world around the ADB autonomous database edition. Is it an edition, or am I using the right word there? Product line, maybe I can say safely. But Nancy, I don't know if you have any comments, having gone through that whole process with me of deciding how to handle it. You can kind of, maybe if you have any comments about how we got where we got.
Yeah, we went through a couple gyrations that I think started out with over explaining, and then we kind of decided to keep it concise. and central in one chapter, I think. And I think personally, I think it worked out well. And I really don't think even ADB users would be disappointed. So
Good. If I did it right, it'll be, well, I can say this. I can say it's the single most comprehensive material about tracing on ADB that's available in the parts of the universe that humans are aware of at this point. There was, Nancy mentioned that centralizing the data, it was a decision, because there was one point at which we were kind of like, all right, well, do we start chapter 2 with, okay, if chapter 2 is about what do you do right after you get your first trace file? And it's like, what is a trace? So that would be different depending on whether you're ADB or not, because an ADB trace is very limited with respect to, if you're comparing it against a trace from Exadata or SE or EE, for example. And then chapter 3 is called Y trace, and it's a good question for both kinds of ADB and non-ADB. And then the next chapter is privileges required for tracing. Well, here there's that fork in the road, because the privileges required on ADB are totally different than the privileges required in a non-ADB system. And so there was kind of one of the options about how to write this stuff in was whether we should kind of have an if statement at the beginning of every chapter. Okay, we're going to talk about max dump file size. If you're ADB, you can skip it because you don't have control over it. And that just ended up being so messy. And I try to be as the word Nancy uses, concise. I try to use as little ink as possible in trying to get points across to folks. So that's how it ended up. And I'm honestly excited, because I find myself already reaching for the book and picking it up to try to remind me of things that I learned but forgot, because I can't cache everything that I can write down every day.
I've actually had cause to use it several times in the past few days.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it just, because it's so small, it makes it very easy to find exactly what I'm looking for.
Excellent.
And it's very useful, I think.
And I don't know if you noticed, but I added a chapter, I want to say Friday, in the section about different products, specific technologies, the part 7. There's an Oracle Apex chapter, there's an Oracle eBusiness Suite chapter, there's a connection pooling chapter, there's a parallel execution chapter, there's an OCI chapter, an RDS chapter, and now there's a SQL CL chapter, because I forgot about App Info. I don't know if any of you use App Info. It's something that I wrote about in the big blue book, in this guy. And I went ahead and included it in this guy. But if you set App Info on when you're using either SQL CL or SQL Plus, you get a module name that's assigned by SQL Plus or SQL CL, and the module name is a %02D integer, followed by a space, followed by a string. And the integer is the nesting level of your script, and the string is the name of your script. So if you set App Info on, actually, let me show you, because I've got some of this stuff is in the repository. So let me drag you over here. I'm going to move my little montage of folks over there. And I went through this last week. I've actually made quite a bit more progress the last couple of days. So there are 2 scripts here. By the way, the context is, this is the GitHub repository. The URL is https://github.com/Kerry Millsap/tracing-oracle. So tracing-oracle. This is the name of my repository in my GitHub user area. And then if you follow the chain through code and SQL, you can see there's a trace packages script and a trace privileges script. And I've been working on these pretty hard for the past few days. There's also, at the same level in the tree as the SQL directory, there's an experiments directory. And in experiments, there's an app info directory, and there's a test1.sql and a test2.sql. It's pretty simple stuff. I'll open it, and let's see what screen it opens on. This one. So let me drag it over. So I know it looks like a lot of bytes, but all this is basically just selecting service module and action from the sys_context function. So I'm saying, what's my service module and action set to now? Let me call test2, which is another script in the same directory right here. And what test2 does is basically just one of the select service module and actions from the syscontext function. So test1 calls test2, and I don't think I want to start up my VM. Given luck we've had this morning, it's going to take me 20 minutes. Something will happen. But when you run test1, what will happen is it'll say the service module and action are set to ORCL is my service name. My module name will be SQL_CL. Oh, actually, no. If I didn't do set app info on, then the module name would be SQL_CL. But with app info turned on, the output of this is going to be Oracle, my service name, and then it'll be 01 space test1.sql.
Oh, cool.
And then when we run test2 will print its service module in action. It'll say Oracle, but the module name will be changed to 02 because it's nested. It's a child of a 01. And then it'll say 02 test2.sql. And then when this line of code runs again, it'll revert back. It'll automatically pop the stack to where it says 01 Oracle, and then the module name will be set to test1.sql. So it's kind of cool. If you use SQL_CL or SQL Plus a lot, it's actually a kind of a neat way that you can basically identify your trace file, because you'll see the module name in the trace data. And also, all your AWR and everything else that groups by service module and action, it'll show up there too. So if you have any applications written in SQL_CL or SQL Plus, which, back in the day, writing applications in SQL Plus wasn't that great of an idea for a few good reasons, but SQL_CL is actually quite a bit.
What is SQL_CL, Kerry?
SQL_CL is the SQL command line interface. The little CL, it's capital SQL and lowercase.
Okay.
And it's the replacement for SQL Plus.
Oh, okay. I guess I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah,
Oh.
you should look it up, because it allows you to do things like set your output format to CSV or HTML or JSON.
Got it.
So your queries come back with all this work for free. It's also fully extensible. I've seen different people at conferences talk about the extensibility with JavaScript, so you can add your own features and functions to it as well. And it's extremely powerful. And it lets
Is it part of the Oracle, suite? It is. Okay.
It is. Cool. Yeah. If you just Google SQL_CL download, you'll find.
Is it better to explain it as like it's this command line version of SQL Developer, right? It's like the Java.
Well, yeah. I think Andy, I see your point of why you would say that. I think when I first heard of it, Chris Rice and I think Sue Harper was even still here, or still at Oracle when they were developing the first version. They kind of pitched it like, this is the new SQL Plus. This is the instead of that you should use now instead of SQL Plus. And I think that SQL_CL engine is built into SQL Developer. At least if it's not now, I think it's going to be when they rewrite it in Visual Studio or whatever they've got planned. But it's basically, if you think of SQL Plus, it fills the same space in the market, but I do believe that SQL Developer uses SQL_CL as its command line processor.
Yes, but and if you install SQL Developer, you also got SQL command line installed.
Oh, good! I did not realize that.
So it's part of the SQL Developer download, and that is downloadable as a small executable for its own as well.
Okay. Yeah. And that's the way that I've installed it. And I noticed the other day I went to upgrade, and I think it requires, I want to say Java 11, Java 11 now. And I haven't done that upgrade yet, but it basically, the only prerequisite is that it requires Java, but it's cool. It does a lot of things, that, 20 years ago, I was aware that I wish SQL Plus did these things, and finally there's a tool from Oracle that does. All right, so there's an app info chapter in Tracing Oracle, and I know you're probably going to get tired of me talking about it when it's not available yet. But part of my world is getting this thing ready to go, and you don't have to wait until this is ready to go visit the repository at GitHub where all the script stuff is. I want to take just a moment to show you some of the stuff that I did the last couple of days. Maybe it'll inspire you to go have a look at it as well. The two scripts that I'm going to be talking about for just a minute are trace packages.sql and trace privileges.sql. And if I open both of these with MacVim, wrong window they opened on, so let me drag that over. I'll just show you real quickly what's going on. The trace packages creates a user called MR, method R. It can't connect. So basically, I'm logged in here and the script is sys, and I'm going to grant just a few privileges to this method R user. And then I'm going to create, again, as sys, I'm going to create the package owned by method R by the MR namespace or MR schema. And then I've just got a few processes for developers that they need. So a trace begin, which allows you to decide whether you want binds or not. I don't make waits an option because I don't feel like waits should be an option for you. You always want waits, always. So I don't even list it as a parameter. That's a philosophical statement on my part. I hate it's waits, binds, plan stat. Why is it not waits, binds, plans? That would be easier to remember. So I renamed the parameter, binds, plans, and then stats. So the statistics level is something that I feel like you should have control over so that you can make sure it's right. If your statistics level is basic and you trace, you're not going to be happy with the result. So that's the trace begin. Trace in doesn't take any arguments. I've got 3 setter functions for module, action, and client. They're really simple. I know that in DBMS application info, there's this enforced hierarchy, which, I'm not trying to avoid the enforced hierarchy, but it's kind of confusing to people sometimes that they've got a procedure with which they can set both module and action, or a procedure that just sets action. So what we're doing here is just giving you 3 separate procedures for setting module, action, and client. We've got the requisite getters. We can't set the service, but we can certainly get the service. We can get the module, get the action, get the client, and also get the file name. And then the to-do for today is I want to write a get content function, probably that will use a directory object like our method R trace utility does, to return basically the content of the trace. And then, there's a bunch of implementation stuff. And then I'll run real quickly through the trace package for DBAs. So I have another package that I'm creating in the script called DBA trace. And I've got 3 constants that I want you to have access to. All modules comes from dbmsmonitor.allmodules. All actions comes from dbmsmonitor.allactions. And then I named a constant all instances, because all these functions in DBMS Monitor where you can supply a null instance name will basically cause the behavior of had you said all instances. But of course, the way they implement it is, okay, if you say null, then I'll trace all instances. But if you say an instance name, I'll only trace that instance. So I found myself going back to the documentation over and over and over again, because some of the things, if you pass a null, it means match if it's empty. Some things mean if it's null, it's like a wild card that means everything. So I wanted to be a little more self-documenting than that. I'm sorry, I hit the mouse by mistake. We should be looking here. So I created a constant called all instances, and its value is null. So now I can say, for example, in database on. So this is basically DBMS monitor.database trace enable, except it only has a binds input, which defaults to false, a plans input, which defaults to first execution, and an instance input, which defaults to null, but it's more self-documenting if I say all instances, because that's how null works. This guy here, handle on, I just renamed yesterday, but it's basically a control over, control over tracing using the Oracle user session handle attributes. So that's where the word handle comes in. But please have a look at the GitHub repository. I will put up this slide. So if you want to take a quick picture of the QR code, that'll get you to methodr.com. I want to mention that if you're watching the video and you want to be part of the live shows, just visit https://methodr.com/subscribe, and that will get you a weekly mail about what the URL is and everything for the topics. Next week, we're going to have a really interesting show. I'm going to talk to Nancy Spafford about some of the things happening at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. That's it. Thank you all for being patient with us today, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week on the show. Thanks so much.
See you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.